all, I want to thank you for taking the opportunity to sit down with us and talk with me a little bit about what's going on in Washington, D.C. Of course, you'll be missed at our legislative dinner coming up July 16th. But
I think I've always attended them, so I'll miss it myself.
I know. You will be missed, and we'll miss you being there. But thank you again for joining us and just letting our members know kind of what's going on from a legislative perspective in Washington, D.C. I guess the best way to just kind of get started is, what do you think is going on in Washington currently that is most important to the citizens of Yadkin County and in the 5th District?
Well, everything that we do in Washington affects everybody in the country. And most people don't pay a lot of attention until it's something that really directly affects them. But honestly, every day we're doing something that affects citizens. We have developed a plan, the Republicans have, which we call a better way. It is looking at principles and policies and philosophies. What we're saying to the American people, if you will elect Republicans this fall, give us a majority in the House and the Senate, and a Republican president, we'll show you what we can really do. We will do true tax reform. We'll get rid of the death tax, which I know affects a lot of people in Yadkin County, more than probably most people would realize. We just don't think people ought to be taxed over and over and over again. We have a program on poverty, education, and work. We want to end the cycle of poverty that exists in this country. Yes, there are people in this country who need help, who truly need welfare, but many can work and do not need it. So we have plans for that. We have a security plan. We have a plan for the Congress to take back its rightful authority and stop the executive branch and the judicial branch from exercising so much authority over the American people. But I encourage people to go to the website A Better Way or better.gop and look for that, because I think most Americans are wanting the kind of philosophy and policies and principles that we espouse. Less government, more control by individuals over their lives.
One of the big issues that's important in agriculture is labor,
Yes.
and the ability to get quality, dependable labor. There's been a lot of happenings in D.C. over the last couple of years that have not fully transpired. And so what is going on in Washington now as it relates to labor reform and H-2A program?
Well, let me start back with the Skills Act. A couple of years ago, I got a bill passed called the Skills Act. It was related to workforce development. You're exactly right. People all over this country are desperate for good labor, really at every level, not just at the farm level, but in technology. We have 5.6 million jobs vacant right now in this country because we have people we don't have people with the skills to do them. In terms of the labor situation with farming, what we want to do is make it a lot easier for people to get folks to work in this country. Make it easier if we cannot get domestic labor, then to bring people in for a set period of time, know who they are, know where they are, allow them to go back and forth. Justin, we had a program like that many years ago, and the unions in this country killed it because they claimed that it was undercutting the unions. Well, we need something back again like that, where it is easy for farmers to get people to come into work from other countries. And my husband and I have farmed all our lives. We were in the nursery and landscaping business for a long time, but we've raised cattle, we've raised potatoes, we've done a little of everything. We did not ever raise tobacco because both of us came from families too poor, frankly, to have a tobacco allotment. But we've done just about every other kind of farming. And so I very much am attuned to what farmers need and want in this country. And this area in particular, farming is so important. Actually, all of North Carolina, agriculture is such an important issue.
Exactly right. Thank you for those comments. Of course, world population is increasing. Those of us involved in agriculture and farming are decreasing, and we're doing more on less land. And we're going to have the responsibility of feeding the increased population,
That's
the worldwide population.
That's right.
So as it relates to trade, getting our products out of the United States to feed the world as the population continues to increase, what's happening in D.C. as it relates to trade?
Well, the issue of trade has gotten very muddled, I think, in the last year or so. I want fair trade for everybody in this country. Trade is essential. We need to get into world markets with our products, and we obviously are the breadbasket of the world. We have been for a long time. We will continue to be. We need to be able to export our products in an expeditious way to other countries. And we don't need other countries setting up barriers against our products going there, but we need to be able to have fair trade and equitable trading partners, people who treat us with respect and we'll treat them with respect. So we've just got to find ways to get our products out of this country into other places. We're a very small part of the world population, and the rest of the world needs us desperately.
That's exactly right. So we're talking about just some regulation issues and tax reform, and you mentioned the death tax there as we started off. You want to go into a little bit more detail on regulation reform and tax reform?
Well, we want to get the federal government off the backs of our farmers. I've told people for years, the best environmentalists, the strongest environmentalists are farmers. They are not going to spoil their land on purpose because they need their land to use for their livelihood. And we just have got to get a sensible EPA. We cannot have an EPA that's totally out of control like this EPA is. Now, we're winning battles in the courts, but again, as long as we have an administration that pushes ridiculous rules and regulations, the hands of the Congress are tied in some ways to undo that. We do our best with the Congressional Review Act, but so often it takes going to court. That's expensive and it's time consuming. The only way we're going to stop this is to have a Republican executive branch that sees it the way the Republicans in Congress see it. We don't want no regulations. Again, we want safe housing, we want safe water, we want safe foods. Republicans are not anarchists. We don't want to do away with all rules and regulations, but we know that most of the time the regulations coming out of the EPA in the last few years and other agencies are unnecessary ones. They're just developed by bureaucrats with nothing to do and bureaucrats who have no connection with reality.
So while we're on that subject, where are we on the waters of the U.S. and the EPA overreach as it relates to that? We've got big court victories. I know.
That's right.
Is there anything going on in the House or in the Senate right now as it relates to that legislation?
When we pass legislation, the president vetoes it.
Right.
And so our calendars are such that we don't have unlimited time.
Yeah.
So what we are going to do always is pass that legislation that we can in the hopes of getting it passed. But we know this president's just not going to sign much of the legislation we want. In the first 6 years of the presidency, the president didn't veto a single bill. But with a Republican Senate and a Republican House now, he's vetoed many bills that we send him. And as I said, time is precious. everybody knows how precious time is. I don't have to tell them. No matter, you don't have to be a member of Congress to have precious time.
Right.
So we have to be very careful how we use our time, and we want to make sure that we don't just waste time passing bills that then the president's going to veto, and we have to go to court anyway. But we are getting court victories, and we're very pleased with those. It's just that they're expensive and time consuming.
One of the big issues that Farm Bureau has been watching recently has been GMO labeling and the effects that a state-by-state regulation would have on not only the agriculture industry, but the food industry.
Sure.
There's been some agreements and throughout the session right now. I think it was announced on June 25th that there was agreement between the Senate Ag Chairman and the Ranking Member that they're going to try to move forward together. That, as far as I know, is a voluntary nationwide labeling system, which I think would be beneficial.
And the House has passed a voluntary labeling system, and I supported that.
Right.
You're right. We just have chaos in this country. If we had individual states that pass labeling laws, it would be terrible. What I point out to people too, Justin, is from the beginning of time, ever since somebody produced a crop of any kind, they'd save their good seed and throw away the bad seed. So we've had genetically modified organisms from the beginning of time.
That's right.
And I tell people that.
Same thing with selective breeding and livestock.
Exactly. We do that all the time.
That's right.
So I don't know what people are so upset about.
That's right.
And again, we wouldn't have the kind of foodstuffs that we have in this country if we hadn't done that. We've learned through trial and error what's good, what's not good. And so we know also that genetically modified foods are safe. It's not as though we have had problems with genetically modified foods. And like I said, they've been with us since the beginning of time. I mean, when I was a little girl, my mother would save the tomato seeds from the best tomatoes and plant them again next year.
Right. That's exactly. I remember my grandmother doing that also.
And we've always the same thing with corn, with potatoes. Just this year, my sister-in-law gave us some seed potatoes because she had some really good ones last year. Ours had sort of, worked their way out, and so we got some good seed potatoes from her. And people have done that forever. So I'm in favor. I will listen very closely to what Farm Bureau comes out with, as I always do, and we will do our best to have a program that makes sense again. My daughter says we all use the word common sense too much, but I always say there's just not nearly enough of it in Washington, D.C. There are too many people in Washington who don't have any connection with the real world, and those are mostly bureaucrats.
That's true. So we've talked about waters of the U.S. We've talked about GMO labeling. It seems that some in Washington have trouble understanding what's a good regulation and what's a bad regulation, and what the role of the federal government should be as it relates to regulations.
Well, what we have to look at, and what again our people in the bureaucracy don't look at, is the cost of these regulations. And in fact, I have a great bill. It's H.R. 50, called the Unfunded Mandates Information and Transparency Act. It's actually passed the House 4 different times, never passed the Senate. It passed the House in March of 2015 and has been in the Senate all that time. And it would force the bureaucrats to be more honest in the cost of a regulation. Again, it doesn't stop regulations, but it forces them to be honest about the cost of it, because when the costs go beyond $100 million, a different set of rules kicks in. And so often they gin up a way to do the regulations so it doesn't hit that $100 million threshold, and then they're not under the same scrutiny. And most of the time, they're not being truthful about it. So we're going to force them to do that if we can get that bill passed. So I will tell everybody, now our senators in North Carolina support it, So your audience tonight is North Carolina people.
Right.
But if they know people in other states, they should talk to them about HR 50. The shorthand for that bill is UMITA, U-M-I-T-A, Unfunded Mandates, Information and Transparency Act. I'm all about accountability and transparency.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's about all that I had for you today. And
thank you. I'm really sorry not to be able to be with you all. I always love being at the Farm Bureau events. Everybody's so friendly and so welcoming, and I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate what Farm Bureau does, but mostly I appreciate your members for who they are and what they do. They are the backbone of this country, and I hope they do feel appreciated. Not enough people thank them for what they do. They have to deal with the weather, they have to deal with the regulations, they have to deal with every kind of thing that goes on in the world. To be a farmer, you've got to be a chemist, an accountant, a weather forecaster, all of those things. And people just don't appreciate farmers enough, I think.
You're exactly right. And we thank you for your service and for always being willing to sit down with us. So thank you again for being here and
I'm
sitting
grateful.
down with us.
I'm grateful the good Lord has given me this opportunity to serve other people. It is a blessing.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.